The meeting started. It's 8:30, and we have one item on the agenda, and that is a hearing. And if the hearing is concluded with time remaining, we will then move into working of bills previously heard. The chair is not in a hurry, so if we don't get to working bills today, we'll get to them tomorrow or sometime in May. I just said that for the benefit of those in the audience because they are a little nervous about us getting up against the clock, but no, we'll get to them next week. Our first item on the agenda is House Bill 2634. So I will open the hearing on House Bill 2634. We shall begin with an overview of the bill from our reviser. Reviser Lawrence, welcome to the committee. It's always a pleasure to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee. House Bill 2634 would provide an additional corrective control provision for the chief engineer when issuing orders of designation for intensive groundwater use control areas, also known as IGUCAs, and local enhanced management areas, or LEMAs. Specifically, the bill would authorize the chief engineer to include in the order of designation of an IGUCA or a LEMA a corrective control provision that would allow flexibility in the use of water rights, including but not limited to multi-year allocations and use in excess of a water rights annual authorized quantity in any given year, so long as the overall use of water is reduced during the term. This is a lot like how multi-year flex accounts work. House Bill 2634 passed the House on a vote of 120-0 and would take effect on July 1 upon publication in the statute book, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for clarification. When the words chief engineer are used, who are we referencing?
That would be the chief engineer of the Division of Water Resources within the Department of Agriculture, and currently that person is Mr. Earl Lewis.
Okay. Well, I wanted to know it's the chief engineer of the Division of Water and Department of Agriculture. Okay, thank you. Questions of our reviser committee. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So compare and contrast, how is, I mean, it's not a 5-year flex plan, but how is it like, not like what we've already got?
So this is specific for IGUCAs and LEMAs. So multi-year flex accounts are, I believe, for individual water right holders.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Our first conferee is one of the bill sponsors, and that is Groundwater Management District Number 1, and our conferee is Katie Durham, who is the district manager. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Thank you, committee, for having us today. We're really grateful for the opportunity to get before you and talk about this bill that is going to hopefully bring a tremendous amount of flexibility to producers within districts that are already doing LEMAs and IGUCAs, which are conservation programs. Just a real quick history. GMD1 currently has 2 LEMAs. One is the 4-county LEMA that encompasses 4 counties. And the restrictions vary anywhere from 0 to 25% based off of historical use. It is in its second year this year and has an approximate total reduction across all 4 counties of about 10%. In addition, we have the Wichita County LEMA and the Wichita County WCA, which have restrictions surpassing 25% per point of diversion, and that is actually in its 4th year this year. And we're seeing tremendous results indicating that total water use reductions in pumping have exceeded expectations to about 40% based off of data, and then comparing that to prior to 2017, which was before the Wichita County WCA went into effect. One of the things that we try to do a lot of within the district and all of our different communities, municipalities, stock water right holders, and domestic water users is to try to understand what their number one, kind of what their feedback is through that outreach, what they want to see in future conservation programs and plans. And one of the big big things was flexibility. Currently, within our LEMAs, you have a 5-year quantity, but you still have to stay within the annual authorized quantity, which in many cases is not too difficult of an issue, but for others, it can be a really kind of difficult accounting process and is a headache for people who are kind of already trying to do their best and be good stewards and good managers of that resource. So what this bill would do is to provide some flexibility in future, potential future LEMAs, obviously pending any, discussions or feedback or final approval by the chief engineer. So it's not saying that every, future plan or LEMA would have this flexibility, but it gives the groundwater districts and the chief engineer the opportunity to at least explore that as an option. And I know that with our feedback, it's been the #1 request of producers in both the Wichita County LEMA, the WCA, and the 4-county LEMA. So because of those reasons, GMD1 is a huge supporter of this bill and would really welcome any questions that the committee may have at this time.
The chair does have a question. You use
Sure.
a couple acronyms, and it's always good to state what they are for the benefit of the committee. LEMA
Locally enhanced management area,
and IGUCA.
an intensive groundwater use control area.
All right, thank you.
Yes, yes, sir.
Questions? Senator Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here and the work that you've done to help conserve water. So this talks about as long as the overall use of water is reduced, I'm on page 2, during the term of the intensive groundwater use control area. So how long, you talked about 5 years, is that the average or?
Yeah, so currently, thank you, ma'am, that's a great question. And currently, there's, many of the LEMAs that are in Kansas are all 5 years currently, but that is open-ended. It could change. Future LEMAs, there's no stipulation as to what the term may be. They could be 10 years. It just depends on what is written into the LEMA when it's submitted to the chief engineer.
So there are 2 additions, one specifically addressing IGUCAs and the other LEMAs, as you explained. But this, there's no restriction other than the term of that, the 5 years or the 10 years, however it's been established.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, no. It would just be within that parameter that's set in the individual IGUCA or LEMA. It's a flexibility just within that term only. Yeah.
Additional questions of Manager Durham? Seeing none, thank you for appearing before the committee and for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our next conferee is from the Groundwater Management District Number 4, Shannon Kenyon, who is the Executive Director and Manager. Welcome to the committee.
Morning. Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Shannon Kenyon. I am the manager for the Groundwater Management District Number 4 in Colby, Kansas. I'm super excited to be here today, in support of this bill. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background, we were the first in the state of Kansas with local enhanced management areas, or LEMAs. We started that in 2013 with the Sheridan 6 LEMA. We expanded that in 2018, then with the GMD4 LEMA. We've seen a lot of great success with that, but also some growing pains as we learn to kind of really get a lot of public input as to what is needed and how they're handling those reductions. We have had, like I said, success in both on the aquifer side of things and the economics. I'm kind of happy to state that just kind of hot off the press, the preliminary water level in the state of Kansas that the Kansas Geological Survey does, the only 2 areas within the only 2 GMDs the water levels actually came up in are the 2 with LEMAs. So that really goes to show you what the success of those are. So to kind of set the stage for why we really are, we came forth with this bill, was with the GMD4 LEMA, which started in 2018. And as you know, within a LEMA, it is a 5-year quantity. However, they are still capped at their annual quantity, their certified quantity that is on their water right by the state of Kansas. So in 2018, when the GMD4 Lima was implemented, we had lots of rain, and I mean lots of rain. It was great. A lot of my guys were like, this is awesome. I'm saving my water. I'm not pumping. I'm preparing for a drought. This is the mentality we really wanted to get them to do. Save this water for when they needed it. Well, that drought came in 2022, and it was nasty. I mean, a lot of areas only got 6, 7, 8 inches of rain in an area that's used to getting 20, 22. And they were really proud of their efforts. I have this water. I can use it because I need it right now. And they really thought that I'll be okay. And then 2022 is also the end of the GMD4 Lima, and they're like, no, I'm not. I have plenty of water in my Lima account, but I don't have enough on my water right. What is the point in me saving all of this water if I can't access it? And so they couldn't do a multi-year flex account, which is a lot of times the answer to that, because we're in the 5th year of a Lima. So you've only got 1 year to borrow from. You can't do a multi-year because it's just 1 year. So the state graciously kind of came up with a one-time, one-shot program where we could do a term permit to kind of cover that if you borrowed it from somebody else that might have had it, within a 2-mile radius. But that wasn't going to happen again. And I said we definitely probably need to look at ways to remedy this to help these guys out. So when we went and did our Lima hearings for the renewal of that GMD4 Lima for a period of 2023 to 2027, which we're currently in, the only testimony that we really received was really, we need an actual 5-year program. I'm willing to save water and adhere to those restrictions, but I need it to be a 5-year program in case of drought. So, and then we also did a lot of public outreach last year as well, and that was the thing I heard over and over again. We just need this to be a true 5-year program. So, to kind of wrap things up, what this bill would do was would allow for a GMD to request in their Lima management plan to the chief engineer that, in our case, it's a 5-year program, but this is clearly up to the chief engineer, obviously, to request that certified water right be kind of set aside, and that with a reduction or a further reduction, we can provide them with an actual 5-year quantity instead of a 5-year and an annual. So with that, I thank you very much, and I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Questions, committee? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I think there are a lot of merits to this bill, but my question is, your comment, you said the water levels actually was going up in your area. So I had 2 questions that came to mind with that. Number one, how much rain did you get last year as compared to normal? And secondly, how was your production as far as, how was that with, thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and I'll kind of cut that up into 2 little parts here. First of all, last year was a strange beast. We started out the year with rain, and boy, howdy, everybody was happy. We're going to start another Lima with rain, and then come July, the tap was turned off. I'll be honest, I was really, really worried about the water levels this year, mostly because there was a lot of late season pumping going on because of the lack of rain at the end of the year. But no, I was happy to see. Now, not everywhere came up in the water levels. There are levels, there's still areas within GMD4 that are declining. However, that is an average over the district when I state that. And then as far as the production goes, it depends. Obviously, dry land, some of those that put in corn or something like that, because of the weather beast that happened, that was an issue towards the end. Hail was an issue as well this year. But I really think those that escaped the hail and had that irrigation that they could utilize that, and it's the first year of a Lima, so that they had that water available, I think they did pretty good.
Additional questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Our next conferee, I will try to get the name right. I'll go by the way looks from spelling, Orrin Farrell, on behalf of the Great Bend, or Big Bend Groundwater Management District 5. If I did not pronounce your name right, please correct the chair.
You're doing just fine, sir.
All right, thank you. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee. My name is Orrin Farrell. I am the district manager for Big Bend GMD number 5. And this morning I am providing proponent testimony on behalf of this bill. Big Bend does not have LEMAs. We've considered those before in the past. For various reasons that didn't go through. We do have 2 IGUCAs. And so one of those IGUCAs right now is under review. And so if this bill were to go forward, this would be one of those items that we want to see considered in that review for revision. The IGUCA I'm referring to is the Wet Walnut IGUCA in Barton, Rush, and Ness counties. And so what we're hearing from those folks is that the restrictions for the junior water users, they're down to 5 inches per acre, 5¼ inches per acre. That's pretty restrictive. There are some provisions for moving water around within that IGUCA, but to have this kind of flexibility for an individual to plan ahead with that allocation for future years, I think would be a very good asset for that individual to have. And so that is one of the key reasons why we're really promoting this bill and would like to see it moving forward if possible. Like I mentioned, we have considered LEMAs before for various reasons, and we're still considering LEMAs. And typically the elephant in the room comes to Rattlesnake Creek, but there are regions within my district that's probably need some consideration. And we are in the beginning processes of looking at those under what was last year's House Bill 2279 to take a look at areas of concern. And most likely you'll see some LEMAs coming out of that discussion. And so we're having those public meetings coming up here at the end of this month or beginning of next month to start those discussions about what the area would like to see moving forward with those areas of concern. And so that is, having these provisions in place would really help those conversations to move forward, because if they're limited to their annual quantities, when they're reduced on that 5-year quantity, it makes it very difficult. Our region is a little bit different than some of the regions out west. We get rain in several years, then the tap shuts off. 2022 is one of those years that was mentioned before. 2023 was another one. It was not as severe, but we still did not get rain. And so our water table did decline in 23, only about a foot. So we're talking that much. Comparison to other regions, historically, you see multi-feet declines. And so we really only see 1, maybe 2 feet on the extreme years of declines. We also see 1 and 2 foot increases routinely. And so our water table does recover really quickly. And so having the flexibility to be able to plan for those droughts and those wet years, plan ahead for that is really a key aspect that we want to see in every one of our programs going forward, whether it be a LEMA or an IGUCA or whatever it may be. So for that reason, we'd like to see this bill moving forward, and I'd be happy to stand for any kind of questions.
Any questions of Mr. Farrell? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Farrell, for your testimony today. I think in your testimony you said that GMD 5, those areas respond quickly to both drought and precipitation, and I also want to thank GMD 5 for responding quickly to all of these events. And I think out of the 5 GMDs, GMD 5 has dealt with numerous federal lawsuits and things. Is there anything going on currently that we can assist you with?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the offer of assistance. Right now, I don't see a lot of need for extra, chiefs around the fire or extra help beyond what we're currently receiving. GMD 5, we're blessed with rainfall. We're blessed with that water table that's very close to the surface. When there's water, there's going to be fights. And so yes, we do have quite a few items of contention within our district, whether it be the R9 ranch, the water transfer, that is in Edwards County, and that moving forward. Obviously the Rattlesnake Creek, the wet wall in Iguka back in the early 90s was another area of contention with Cheyenne Bottoms, as you're well aware. So at this point, I don't see a huge need to, to go beyond what we're already receiving. Thank you.
Additional questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. It's kind of a 101 question, so we're always learning something new every day. So IUCA, it says, can be implemented by the chief engineer, and then you talk about LEMAs. Do those areas ever overlap, or does an IUCA come in and maybe be part of a LEMA? Just wondered if you could kind of talk a little bit about how the two relate to each other.
Sure. So the Iguka statute was put in place back in early 80s, 78. So it's one of the older statutes with regard to these types of corrective controls. And so that is a process that is initiated either by the chief engineer or by the GMD, requesting the chief engineer to come in to take a look at an area. The chief engineer would then hold a series of hearings to gather information, but ultimately the decision on what those corrective controls would be for that Iguka lay within the chief engineer's office. And so it's his or her decision on what that corrective control looks like. And so that's, like I said, the case in Wet Walnut Iguka of reducing those junior water users down to 5 inches, senior water users to 12 inches, and so on. And so that's really the more of a top-down approach on these corrective controls. Then in 2013, 14, the LEMA concept, is that about right, the time frame, 2012? 2012, the LEMA concept came forward of the same corrective controls that Iguka has, but it's really originated by the GMD, by the local stakeholders on what they want those corrective controls to be. It then goes to a set of hearings that's held by the chief engineer and ultimately signed off on by the chief engineer as a result of those hearings, but it's all started with and managed by that GMD, by the local stakeholders. So it's more of a bottom-up approach at those corrective controls. As far as the boundaries and overlap between them, I'm not aware of any that overlap right now, and I don't think that you'd see those probably because of those corrective controls already being in place. But my speculation is if they would, the most restrictive corrective control would win. And so if a LEMA came in that was less restrictive than an Iguka that overlapped, the more restrictive corrective control would be the one that takes place.
Additional questions? Seeing none, Mr. Farrell, appreciate you being here.
Thanks,
also
sir.
Appreciate the fact you understand that today is Pink Tie Day.
That's right. I noticed that too, sir.
Our next conferee committee is Jackie Garagiola, Associate Counsel of the Kansas Livestock Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for allowing me to be here today to testify in support of HB 2634. As Mr. Chairman stated, I'm Jackie Garagiola with the Kansas Livestock Association, representing our roughly 5,700 members across the state. We believe that HB 2634, really just restating what the other conferees have said, is a means for flexibility for our members who are taking part in a LEMA or an Iguka, while still maintaining a certain level of conservation and making sure that that's the priority. So we believe that this would assist our members. We have one thing that is kind of specific to our members or to the livestock industry that I wanted to point out here. We actually have some water distribution issues, especially within our feed yards and our dairies. And that's simply because you may have a number of wells feeding into a centralized distribution. And so because of that, you may have one well that overpumps, and then you may have one that significantly underpumps. And really the cause for that is because of differing levels of elevation or head counts or even differences in hydrologic pressure. So we are still wanting to pursue that overall water savings, but having that flexibility between the wells when it's a centralized distribution system would be extremely helpful, especially within our feed yards and dairies. And as has been said before, this is very similar to MIFA language and also to WCAs or water conservation areas, which our industry also utilizes. So we would be supportive of this in order for us to be able to institute those water conservation practices, such as livestock watering tanks that are more efficient, water recycling systems, that type of thing. So definitely in support of this bill, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions. Just wanted to point out one thing that is maybe unique to the livestock industry.
Thank you. Committee questions? Oh, okay, I was afraid we were going to let you get off easy. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Glad to be of help. Thank you for your testimony. When you talk about the distribution centers and coming in, are those often under the same water right, or are there cases where they're combining different water rights?
So they may have multiple different wells, multiple different water rights that have a certain allocation, and that's where we see the issues, is that maybe one, because of the hydrology, is pumping more from that one water right, but the total allocation of those water rights is not exceeded because one may be significantly underpumped. But it's bringing it all together through pipes and other things, to get it to that one spot in a feed yard to be able to distribute it to the livestock. And so that's where we're seeing the issues. And so sometimes it's, like I said, it's an issue of gradient elevation, just how the feed yard is laid out. And so this can be an easier fix to that without doing a ton of development, reconstructing everything, which can be expensive.
Okay, when I'm looking at this, I believe in both cases, it refers back to an individual water right, not a group of water rights. And so that's something that you might talk further with other members of the Livestock Association and make sure that that's the understanding that they have, or correct me or change it, because I think it is an individual water right and not an opportunity to combine more than one. But
I could look into that further. I know we've done something similar within our WCAs, so I could talk with, I have not been a part of constructing those, and so I'd be happy to talk with our general counsel too. He's been a part of developing those, and I know that's some flexibility that we've used in the past, so we could talk further about that also. Happy to.
And I would also ask the reviser, if she would interpret that as a single water right?
Supervisor Lawrence, you wish to have an answer for us?
I will think about that.
We trust you'll get an answer on that. Okay. Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you for appearing before the committee. Committee, I will direct your attention to the fact that we have written proponent testimony from Randy Stuckey for representing the Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, Kansas Grain and Feed Association. We also have written proponent testimony from the Kansas Farm Bureau. However, I will point out and ask you to make certain that you do look at the Kansas Farm Bureau, because they have written testimony providing qualified support. Apparently, they have something they want us to consider in reading through the testimony, so I would urge the committee to read through the testimony, because I will be planning to work the bill in the not-too-distant future. So that is all that we have as far as proponents. There are no opponents. We do have neutral testimony from Mr. Earl Lewis, who's the Chief Engineer for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Water Resources. Mr. Lewis, welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Earl Lewis. I'm the Chief Engineer of the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. I appreciate the opportunity to appear neutral today. and hopefully you have my testimony in front of you. Mostly I'd like to echo a lot of what's been said here already today. I think the previous proponents have done a great job of laying out the positive benefits of the bill. We are presenting neutral primarily because we want the GMDs to remain in the lead on this issue, and as a state agency implementing this statute, certainly we want to understand and follow your lead as the policymaking body. We do see that there's some benefits that we want to hit on maybe in addition to what has already been said. One of those is, and I think Shannon talked about it very well, I think there's been a lack of clarity as local enhanced management areas have been put in place of whether or not the 5-year allocation governs or whether the annual allocation governs. And that has caused a little bit of a pinch for a number of producers. And just to be clear, I'll give you an example. Let's say that a water right has 200 acre feet a year as an authorized quantity. So historically, they may have been able to pump 1,000 acre feet over a 5-year period. But seeing that we've got water level declines, we may say that under the GMD's leadership, they may say we want to have an allocation of 600 acre feet over a 5-year period. Now, their water right still means they can pump up to 200 acre feet in any given year, but they're limited over a 5-year period. So we end up trying to balance that overall water use over a longer period of time. And it can be 5 years, it can be something else. All of the allocations so far have been 5 years. And I think that's just because people are comfortable with that kind of a time period. They want some level of flexibility, but they don't want to commit to something for too far out and then see whether it works or not. But what we've seen is, as again, Shannon correctly laid out, we've had some people that didn't understand that they were still limited on their water right. And so we run up a couple against some problems with some overpumping. Very, very rare, but we had some people that had some concerns there. We do have other tools that we can use. We have the multi-year flex account that could come into play. We talked about the term permit, which is, again, a Band-Aid. We don't want to use that in this kind of a situation. Those all have costs for the producer. They all have workload implications for our staff. When somebody files a MIF applications, there's $400 filing fee. It takes some of their time, takes a lot of our staff time to try and process that. And so we see this as an overall workload savings for the division and also a little bit of clarity and a workload for the producer as well. The other thing is, in every situation, whether it's a multi-year flex account, whether it's a water conservation area, whether it's a LEMA or IGUCA, whenever we have given producers flexibility over a 5-year period, what we have seen is that they become better water managers. They're more conservative, especially on those early years. Again, just as you heard earlier, if they've got a wet year, especially in those early years, they're going to say, I want to be very conservative in my water use because I don't know what years 3, 4, and 5 are going to look like, and I may need that water. And so we continue to see people be very conservative, push water down the line, and almost without fail, we end up with less water use overall when we provide this flexibility. But we've got to put ourselves in a position when that drought does come that neither the producer nor our staff are scrambling to try and figure out how to make sure that we stay within that allocation but provide that flexibility so the producer doesn't lose a crop. And we feel like this is a good option to do that. This really gives us the option to do that in the front end. Senator Francisco, coming back to, I think, your question here on multiple water rights versus one water right. This would apply to one water right, but there's already flexibility within the LEMA law or within the IGUCA law that we can allow producers to combine different allocations so long as they stay within their overall allocation for, if they had 2 or 3 water rights. So we've got that built into a few of our management plans for those LEMAs or IGUCAs already. We just didn't have the ability, if that happens, whether that happens or whether it's a single water right, when we get into a year like we had in 22, where they need to pump a little bit past their annual authorized quantity, that we can do that as part of the management plan for the LEMA or IGUCA. And so we think this is an overall good thing for the producer, good for the state, and good for our staff as far as workload. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I know, appreciate everybody that's come before that has provided some leadership on these issues and some water conservation. I'd be happy to answer questions if you all have them.
Any questions of Mr. Lewis? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lewis, for your presentation. So I hear your testimony. I read the stuff here. My question would be, why would you be neutral?
Well, again, mostly because we want, the GMDs have brought this issue forward. We want to be supportive of them, but we also want to keep them in the lead from a proponent testimony. And then again, from a state agency standpoint, when we're dealing with one of our programs where we don't bring the bill, we think it's more appropriate for us to remain neutral and then see what the will of the committee is.
Thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I guess Mr. Lewis, I should get your title, but Chief Engineer Lewis, thank you for identifying a concern for workload, and thank you for eliminating some of the workload from our revisor and one of the proponents.
Always happy to help.
No additional questions. So you are the mysterious chief engineer in the bill,
Very, very mysterious, sir, yes.
at least at this time.
That's right.
Eventually,
Correct.
maybe someone else.
Someday there'll be somebody else, that's right.
All right. Thank you for appearing before the committee and your testimony, answering questions for us.
Thank you.
We have no further conferees on House Bill 2634. So we will close the hearing on House Bill 2634. Committee, we do have a little time remaining for the committee, so we will use it efficiently. We trust, at least we will get started on working a bill, and the bill that we will start working is House Bill 2477. You should have House Bill 2477 still in your packet. As a refresher, we will ask our revisor to give us a brief overview to remind us of what 2477 contains.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2477 would increase the maximum reimbursement from the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Fund from $200,000 to $300,000 for an eligible person, and from $400,000 to $600,000 when there's both a buyer and a seller, or a lessee and a lessor who are responsible for remediation. The bill would also increase the amount available to the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Board for administrative expenses from $150,000 to $175,000. And I'll be happy to answer questions.
Any questions of our revisor committee? Seeing none, committee, in hearing the bill, there was discussion regarding the rate of inflation and the numbers. I do not have a recommendation on the numbers of the funding available, moving from the 200,000 to 300,000, et cetera. However, since we're going to be moving the reimbursement level up, I am going to make a motion. This is a simple conceptual amendment on line 27, where it talks about the $1,000. Since we are moving up the dollar amount and inflation, $1,000 is different in 2024 than it was in 2020 when the legislation passed. The motion would be to change that 1,000 to 2,000. So is there a second for the motion?
A second.
Motion by Peck, seconded by Senator Fagg. Discussion on the motion. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly agree with that because it's part of a amendment that I asked our revisor to prepare.
Well, okay, since I've already made the motion, and all right, further discussion. Seeing none, committee, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. So it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Senator Francisco, that you might have an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have an amendment. I'll ask the revisor to distribute it.
The amendment has been distributed. Senator Francisco, would you explain your amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did talk with the proponents about the bill and about how the remediation board figures their numbers. So the bill, or the statute as it exists, is awkward because it makes two different statements. One is that currently 90% of the total eligible corrective action costs greater than 1,000 and less than or equal to 100,000, plus 80% of the total eligible corrective action costs, between 100,000 and 200,000. But then it goes on to say, and then the total amount reimbursed for any one site shall not exceed 200,000. So we've put two different statements in the bill. One, that it can't be more than a percentage of those numbers, and one, that it can't be more than a total number. And I think this was confusing to the remediation board because what they then did was work backwards from the $200,000 figure rather than using either 90% or 80% of those monies. And in fact, I should have thought to distribute this, and I know that you, Mr. Chair, got a copy, that the applicant figured the amount of approved costs by taking 100,000 and dividing it by 0.9 instead of 100,000 by multiplying it times 0.9. So they got $111,101.11. So I don't think that was the intention. So since they seem to have difficulty with math, I thought it would be helpful to talk. I used that same $2,000 number, and then I said, and less than or equal to costs of $102,000. So in fact, you could get reimbursed on $100,000 of your expenses, because that is $100,000 over the $2,000. And then going on with that, you could get $200,000 more because the total now is $302,000. So that's one part of the amendment. I also was confused about whether there's both a buyer and a seller, and why that would mean you would get more money for remediation, because in fact you have more ability. And finally, because we already have an amendment and it's, the bill will be printed, I think it would make more sense, and this is on page 3, to submit the independent audits to the Standing Committee on Agriculture rather than the Standing Committee on Energy. So I would be open to questions and certainly willing to take these changes in chunks instead of the full amendment.
All right, I do have a question on the very end on page 3. It says the Senate Standing Committee on, and it's crossing energy, inserting agriculture, and then you insert any successor committee, which is good, but the next, it talks about the House Standing Committee on. Right, so, okay, Revisor Lawrence, if you want to make a technical correction.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize. The balloon should say where it strikes environment, and it should say, it should insert agriculture and natural resources or any successor committee. So in that third box, if the committee would mind including agriculture and natural resources, that would be great. Thank you.
Senator Francisco, was that your intent?
That was my intent, and I think that was my request, but we went back and forth a little bit on that. I think at one point the revisor thought I wanted to change where the bill was coming from. But that is my intent, and if work that, I would like to see that the words agriculture and natural resources added.
All right, committee, so that is the intent of the amendment, that it state the House Standing Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee or any successor committee. We just left out the agriculture portion. And as far as the email that she referenced, I do not know if I had received it. Do you know, Senator Francisco, if the rest of the committee had received the email from Mr. Stuckey?
I do
I have a copy, which I'm glad to pass around if you haven't seen. It's not really vital, but she referenced the email, so I thought I'd mention it. So if you are finished with your explanation, and do you wish to make a motion for us to move forward with discussion?
I would move the amendment.
Okay, so you're making a motion to amend House Bill 2477 with the balloon and the slight correction in the balloon.
I'm making a motion to amend it, except for the amendment, I guess, that's already on.
Okay, all right, I understand. Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Senator Kirshen. Discussion on the motion. You have the amendment in front of you, committee, if you have questions or discussion on the motion. I see. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can appreciate Senator Francisco's attempt to simplify the math. However, when I'm teaching my children how to interpret a math word problem, I teach them first to look for the key words. And in line 27, the word plus is the key word. In the original bill, the math is already mathing for me. So I think that putting amounts in statute of 102,000 and 302,000 is more confusing than just leaving it in whole 100 amounts. I wouldn't support the amendment if the bill as it reads, the statute as it reads has been in practice for I don't know how many years now, and I think it made sense, and I imagine that the fund already has formulas that are in their program that calculate the reimbursement rates. Basically, it's 90% of the first 100,000 and 80% of costs in excess of that. So I think it's fairly simple to do the math, and I imagine they're using a calculator, so I trust that they'll get it right. Anyway, thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Mr. Chair, I think that that actually demonstrates some of what the confusion is, because the statement was made, it's 90% of 100,000. Is that how you read this currently for Senator Straub?
So you're asking Senator Straub?
If what she's saying is that it should be 90% of the total corrective action costs of 100,000.
Senator Straub, do you wish to answer?
It actually, if you read all the language in it, it's 90% of total eligible costs greater than, now it's 2,000 with the amendment, and less than or equal to 100,000 plus 80%. I mean, you have to read the word problem and highlight all those key words and then do the math, and it works.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, in the information.
I can recognize you, but I'd recognize Senator Reichman, and then we'll go to you. I apologize. All right, Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is, how long has this bill been in, and really how much of a problem has this been for the what we got going on here? Can anyone answer that?
The legislation, my understanding, was first passed in 2000 and took effect in 2001. Is that correct? It was 2000 and then took effect 2001? Okay. All right, so it's been in effect since 2001.
Okay, so we've had it for 20-some years, and there hasn't really been that much of a problem as far as my understanding of it. So I'd hate to have a lot of changes when people seem to figure out what's going on. Thank you.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my apologies. So again, this would mean that you would take 90% of $98,000, and then of the other. So we were starting out with the 98,000 instead of 100,000 that you could use because the 2,000 has been subtracted. If the concern of the committee is not using whole numbers, that's really not a problem. I thought it did make it easier to explain to people that, if you have significant costs, you can get up to $100,000 of those costs reimbursed. But I believe it has been a problem because they have reimbursed applicants up to $100,000 or up to the $200,000 because they backed into the formula rather than limiting it to a percentage as written in the statute.
Further discussion on the motion to amend? Seeing none, Senator Francisco, do you wish to close?
I would just ask if Senator Straub would be more comfortable if these were round numbers of 100,000 and 300,000.
Senator Straub, you wish to answer?
I think just leave it the way it is. It made sense the first time.
All right. Senator Francisco, go ahead and close on your motion, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move my amendment.
All right, you have heard the motion to amend House Bill 2477 with the balloon as presented with the one minor technical correction. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. Okay. Did you vote twice? Oh, okay. All right, the motion appears to fail. Motion does fail. We are back on the bill as amended. Committee, I do like the page 3 amendments particularly. I had not thought of that amendment. Since we have it in front of us, I'm going to just sort of, if you will, piggyback on the page 3 of Senator Francisco's amendment to change the committee to agriculture in the Senate and Agriculture, Natural Resources, or any successor committee. So if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer the questions. But again, look at page 3, the amendment that was offered. I'm going to make a motion that we amend the bill with that language, with, again, the technical change. Senator's motion by Peck, seconded by Senator Fagg. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Committee, what is your wishes with House Bill 2477? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I am confused as to why, if the property has been sold or leased, then both the buyer and the seller, if they're responsible for remediation, get double the amount any other property owner would get for the remediation. So I would make a motion to just strike if the property on lines 33, all of lines 34, 35, 36.
Through line 4.
Through line 4 on 2.
Okay, committee, you have that in front of you. It's fairly simple. You can see after the 300,000, line 33, striking all the wording. The remainder of that page through line 4 on page 2. Is that a motion, Senator Francisco?
That is a motion.
All right, is there a second on the motion? See, Senator Kirshen seconds the motion. Discussion on the motion. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe for Tamara, was that part of the original statute, or was that an amendment?
Revisor Lawrence.
I would need a few minutes to check on that.
If you look at the bill, you can see there is a little bit stricken, the 400,000 within a 5-year period, the first several words on line 1, and then from 600,000 forward, it is a lot of new language, some current language.
Yeah, it says, I believe the board may, pursuant to rules and regs, set forth a different amount. So I think this is because there's an individual maximum reimbursement. So in order to make sure that a site can be fully remediated and possibly sold, you could utilize 2 individual entities maximum to take care of one issue. I'm fine with it.
Revisor, is that the way that you would read it as explained by Senator Straub? Or were you reading and not hearing? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. Further discussion on the motion to amend. Senator Francisco.
Thank you. Just to note that the lines, the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Board may set forth a different amount, less than equal to, is separate from the wording that I'm trying to strike.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, Senator Francisco, do you wish to close on your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to provide funds for remediation in these situations, but I am confused as to why, if there are 2 entities, that you would double the amount, because it's, I would prefer to see just a larger amount made available for any site for remediation.
So you're...
I would move my amendment.
All right, you've heard the motion to amend House Bill 2477. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. Okay, we've got a lot of members not voting. It sounded like it was 2-1. So let's just do a division so I can get a better understanding of the committee's position. All in favor of the motion to amend, raise your hand. Okay, all right. Motion passes. Committee, we are back on the bill as amended. Any additional amendments or discussion? And we can hold this over till tomorrow if we're not finished working the bill. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tamara did tell me that language that was just now taken out with that amendment was added in 2008. So it was an amendment to the bill. I'm guessing there was an issue, and maybe someone else in this room can enlighten us, but I'm guessing there was probably an issue of trying to sell a property, but because it had a site that needed to be cleaned up, it was probably stopping the sale of it. So if you can utilize 2 maximums of the individuals to solve the issue, then that's probably what allowed for the sale of the property. So.
Since we are up against the clock and you have a question, we're going to hold this. This will be the first item on the agenda for tomorrow, is to complete our work on House Bill 2477 before we get into tomorrow's agenda on a bill hearing. So with that, we are adjourned.